Hey folks, this is a second lecture I'm going to do on unique constraints. The reason why I'm doing a second lecture is I want to talk about um, how we can use the group UID, sequential UID, and probably sequence objects. So I'm going to cover some parts of default constraints, default, and also unique. Because once you know how to do these, um, you can now make unique. You can make unique values that are random, and they will be auto-generated, and they are a bit more versatile than using identity. So, and there's some stuff in the notes about using group GUID and sequential UID, and I mentioned in passing about the sequence objects. So this will give you an idea of how to do that. So what we'll start with is let's start with the sequence object. Okay, that might be a little bit more complicated. So, and the way I like to do things is I'll go back to the notes. Because as much as possible, we're not trying to cram things. What you would do in real life is you will look stuff up. The things you do all the time, you remember. The things you do once in a while, you'll look at how it's done and then you'll copy it and then you'll modify it. Okay? Things change so often that we don't really need to be cramming. You cram by using it over and over. Okay? So we make tables all the time, so you'll start to have an idea of how to make tables and how to do the constraints. You won't make sequence objects as often, or maybe you will. So let's just go over to, if I go over here to, where is it? It's somewhere in the notes. I think under sequence objects. How else could I found it in case I forgot? I can type in here sequence object, and it will take me there. Remember everything as much as, and then over here you see it's generating surrogate keys, and you see sequence object over here. I will go back because there might be somewhere. Oh, you see there's something over here, right? This is what I was looking for. So I didn't even have to remember, I just remembered it somewhere in there. So you see the syntax that we talked about. This is another type of object. We're doing what? So since it's an object, we use create. So we could create sequence name. You alias it as int. You start with a number. You increment by another number. You can set a minimum value, a minimum and a max value, and say whether number will be cycled or not. And you can set a cache size. So and then there's an example over here. I want to look at the example because frequently, you might recall I mentioned I like to put sequences in their own schema. It makes stuff so much easier to manage. So what I'm going to do is I'll go here. Oh, and you see how I wanted to do that if it's not null? This is an example over here. So I'm going to copy this. There's many things that, again, you'll see so many things that you don't always need to do that. And I'm going to go new query and I'll paste this here. And so what will I do again? I'm going to replace, you see I'm using the test database. I could put in here, it's a good idea to always say specifically which database you're using. So I'll say use test. And you see it will autocomplete. Go. And I'm going to do find and replace for the apostrophe with single quote. Right? So I've done that, and then I'll close this up, and then I'll tab over and remove these. That's what happens sometimes when you're copying and pasting from text. So now that looks okay. Why is it? Because it says they're already a sequence object. But what will this do? If it's not null, it will drop it. Remember when I was trying to go over here, I commented it out. I forgot what to do. So I can just say now, if is not null, right? I want to drop customer. Otherwise, so you see now I can take that out and I'll tab this over. You see how I'm switching between places? And since it's a statement, I'll put semicolon there. Okay, good. And what I'll also do, I still have my cursor. What I'm going to do now, you see everything is getting a bit more complicated now. I have my over here. Last time we were here, I put this stuff in customer, right? So I'm going to cut a couple of things. I'll cut this and I'll put this at the top. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to see that there's things that are in the same schema, and I want to put all of those together. I want to put all my table definitions. So you see I have this customer.liaisons. I'm going to cut this also. And we will get to see how to do these things like the sequence and GUID I was talking about. But first, let's put everything in one place. And you see over here in customer invoices, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this. I'm going to drop this. Remember, there's no data inside it. I'm going to have a completely separate invoice schema, right? And I'll do that in a minute. But first, let's go in and set some things up over here. And thank you again, folks, for being patient and watching what we're doing. So I have this in here, setting up the customers table. I'll just put in a comment over here. Why will I put a comment? To make it easier to read. I'll just say default constraints, right? And I'll say unique. And we can see that they say unique, but what will I notice first, just to make it easy to read? And I'll now going to drop this. So I'll say what? Oh, there's a primary key, right? And so we have that over here. Now I'm going to make the sequence. So you see I've made a sequence object. And so I'll actually just cut this, because the reason why I'm going to cut this is I'm not going to do all the sequence objects in one place. I'll do them over here. So I'll just do Control V. And actually this matters. So, and now what will I do? So I have my default. I'm going to put in a line over here. And I'll say it's for companies table, right? Oops, I'll use a period. And I'll go back to the notes. And you see, I'll go and cut this. Why am I cutting that? I could use an example in there, but I think it's nicer to just use this so I can get kind of used to messing about with it. Control V. And I'll cage size, colon. And you see, when I do it this way, it gives me things to fix. And I will create sequence start with, let me tab those over, right? Sequence name. So this sequence, what do I want to use? I want to say sequence, seq dot company. That's it. I could say seq dot companies. I'm saying company because then I know this is each sequence. There's collection of company sequence numbers, but this is an individual one. And let's start with, and you see it says int, so this should be an int. Let me start with 0. So I'll start with 1, okay? Increment by 1. And let me set the min number to be, actually I won't set a min number or max. I'll just remove that. And then I'll say no cycle. So when you see a caret, so it means that I want it should be it's optional. So let me make a case size 10. Right? So now you see, how do I know this works? It looks fine. There's no errors. And you see now, instead of using identity, I'm going to, so we have this set up, right? Now, how will I use this sequence number for the default? I want to use that for the surrogate ID. And so I'll go, comma, constraint, company, surrogate, ID, underscore, df, default. Now, if I'm correctly, I have to say default. Next, let me look what it is. I think it's next. Yeah, next value for sequence. So I'll say default next value for. Then I say the sequence name, and that's why I like to use that. I like to use that schema because once you see sequence dot company, and you read this, you now see it seems to tell you what is next value for sequence dot company for which column surrogate ID, and that's it. So you see I'm using that over here. And so what else do I need? So I have my unique constraints, right? We did all of this before. So first let me highlight and run this and see what it does. Okay, so I'll highlight this part, and maybe to make it easy to read, I'm going to put something over here, another comment. kind of company of customer dot companies definition. Okay, it's just something, a visual check that should help me see it. Maybe if I'm going to put that and let me put that at the beginning, right? So and if I'm going to do that, and change this to define the customers. I'll put Control C, Control V. Okay, and good. And then what I'll do is I'll just copy this, Control C, and just paste it over here. And I'll change this to Control C, Control V. Okay, good. And let's save this now as, I'll give it a name as customer schema diff. Okay, that's just so I can see it's a customer schema definition. Everything in the customer schema. And now, so let's run this part. First I'll run it, and I'll put at the top, I want to say what's database, so I'll say use test. Go. And save that again. I'm jumping around a lot. Let me execute this part first. Oh. Part first. If. Oh, drop schema. So now let me highlight that and execute. The real customer. So let me try this one. So that's telling us. So you see, there's already something in there. So I'll just comment this stuff out again. It's a block comment. I'll leave it in there and figure out how to do it later. Okay. I need the schemas. I don't really need to drop them. So I'll just comment that out. Oops. Okay. Now I've done that. So I'll just run this part again. Let's see what happens. Execute. Everything went just fine. So let's refresh this. And we'll look now at the columns. Right, you see it says int, not null. So maybe let's look at the keys. We see those constraints. That's what we're expecting. And is there anything else? It goes triggers, indexes. There's nothing there. Okay, so we can see that there's statistics, but we don't need to worry about indexes and other stuff. But if you look, we haven't talked about indexes. We won't discuss them this call, but you see that there's indexes on the things that are unique, that are keys. And what does that mean? We use an index for searching. So we use a key for searching, just like we use an index for searching in a book. Okay, so we've seen one example of how to use a sequence object. Now, with this example, you see that the ID is going to be the primary key, right? We also have seen that if you set a primary key, it also makes it unique. And I'll show you that over here with the liaisons. Go here, see there's a liaison. And if we go index, let's see. Oh, it does. We don't have, so if you make a key, you don't have to if you make a primary key, you don't have to tell it to be unique. I like to just have it unique anyway. It's kind of error handling and to say things explicitly. It might work with this version with this implementation of SQL. There might be some other implementation of SQL where it might not behave that way. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to cut. You might notice I don't like to type things a lot. So what I'm going to do now, and is for consistency, I'm going to do Control C. Some folks might not find this to be the most ideal way of doing stuff. Control V. Why? And then I'll just change this to if I did this now. How can I make this work? I'll just cut all of this. Control X. New query. Control V. And every time I see company, I'll do edit, find, quick replace company with liaison. See? And I'll change companies to liaisons. Yes. And I think I've misspelled liaison, so I'm going to change that. Liaison to liaison. Yeah, that's fixed everything. So you now see I have that sequence and it's just changed it all over the place. But I don't have that part works, that part works. Now I'm not going to put a default email or phone number for a liaison. Why? Because a liaison person, if you're the contact, they have to give you their phone number and email at least, right? So I'm going to change this to not null. And we have an ID. I'm also going to put in a surrogate ID column. Int not null. Okay. I'll change this ID. What I want to show you right now is how to do the GUID. So I'll say GUID. Wait, is it? Let's look at what it says in the notes. So if I go to the notes, I go to the notes, and I go clear that. I'll just type GUID because I know that's what it is. I forget what the keyword is. It says guideline. Let me say sequential. Let's see what this pops up. And I think I have a typo in there. Okay. Well, I know it's somewhere. So I'll go primary key. I'll go data types of primary keys. It's unique identifier. That's a keyword I wanted. So you see the keywords are in red. So I'll do copy, Alt tab, and I will now put Control V. You see it likes that, right? And I'm also going to take this away, Control X. See, that's correct, isn't it? Surrogate. I'm going to change this now. I'll leave that as surrogate ID. And I'll replace this with a comma and close that up. Okay, so you see now I'm using sequence liaison for the surrogate ID. That part doesn't change. Now let's see how I can now use generate a unique identifier, a unique ID for the liaison person. And so I'll go in here. You see it, this is company, this is a typo. So I'll change that to liaison. And there isn't a liaison website, so I'll take that out. Right? And they're not supposed to have a default. Remember, I don't want to have a default user name and password, a default first and last name, because if as a liaison person, they should have their own name, email, all of that stuff. So I'm going to just change this to liaison ID default, and I'm going to change this to ID. Get rid of this line. And now I want to, I'm guessing it's going to be similar to this. So we'll say default, next value for, and if I'm correctly, it's new GUID. I'm calling a function. Does it like that? No, it does not. I think it might be new sequential unique identifier. Let's look at what it says in the notes. And everything in the notes, you can also find it. Oh, it's new ID. Everything in the notes, you can also find it from Microsoft's documentation. Yeah, does it like that? Default next value, default next, new ID. Here's an example. Default new ID. What? Default. Oh, default. You see, I don't have to say that's it, right? Default, because this is going to generate a new ID. How do we know? If I go new query and select new ID, let's see what it makes. Execute. You see, that's an ID. And I run this again, they're all unique. So go back here, and that's it. So you see how you can use new ID for generating random. So this is another way I can. So now you see, what am I doing here? I'm using new ID for generating some random unique identifier, and I'm using sequence for generating a unique number, right? This might look a little bit more involved than using identity, but it can be much nicer to work with. Now I've done that, you see, I can now say, I have these things in here, and I will now put in, I don't put street address, I will say email. So I'll say email. Oops. And to make it readable, I think I'll cut this, Control X, put it over here, Control V, oops, Control X, Control V, and I'll do another one. I'm going to change this to phone. So constraint, so this is going to be liaison phone, and that's going to be on phone column. And there's email, there's ID. So you see, these are all unique, and you can see an example here. Okay, and I think this is good so far. And I'll just put in another comment over here. Primary key. That's all I need to say. Okay, so you should, what else? Okay, so let's execute this. Okay, column name does not exist. So if I click here again, you see it there's, where is it? Let me click. It should take me to the line. You see it brought me to the line. But because there's a number of them, I can't see it. So I just will now change this first name. And I'll say first name. Right, and let me cut this. Control X. Control V. Because you see I have a last name, right? So I'm going to put, actually let me do Control V. And I'll change this one lost. And lost. And I'm trying to change these so it's easy to read. I'll cut that. Control V. I find this makes it easier to read. It's not that big a deal. And Now let's run this. And the nice thing about doing everything in its own window is it's easier to just concentrate on what this right now, execute. So there's already a sequence object in there. So now you see I'm going to copy this, Control C, Control V, and I'll do sequence SEQ. Control C, Control V, and I think it's S for sequence, and it will be Control C, Control V, tab over, and I'll do drop. Let's see if what this does, okay? So I'm not using the right thing for sequence. So I think I can do if object ID SEQ. Let me look it up. I'm going to go to my browser real quick. And I'll show you how it looks this up. Acronym. I have it in my notes elsewhere for sequence object transact SQL. Maybe this will show it. If it doesn't, I will show you another where I have it in another file. No, I'm not seeing it there. It doesn't look like it. So what I'm going to do now, I'll go Alt Tab. I'll go File. I know I've done this before. As I said, I don't always. It's not something I do every day. I just do it per table. So I'm going to go File. Go SQL scripts. Go to my. I'll go in here. Go to one of these. Open that. And I'm just looking for, there it is. You see it's SO. So I'll just copy this. And you see over here I'm using a min and max value, and I wrote it differently over there. So I'll just paste it here. Boom. And there's somewhere in Microsoft's documentation where we can look this up. I don't really want to do it right now. I like how I did it before, where I wrote these on one line, because I think it's just easier on the eye in some way. Okay, so now I'll run this. Really? Okay, that's why. Let's do this one more time. See it? There's a error. There, everything works. So you've seen where I've used a default. I've used a new ID to generate what? A unique identifier. And you see over here I'm using surrogate ID, right? And I think I want to do one more, because I mentioned, but before I do that, I'm going to cut everything in here. Cut. Where was I before? Really? Oh yeah, and then I'll go customers, yeah, it was in here, right? So I'll just that's not right. I think I'm missing. I probably lost something. This is 17, 16. I'll do Control Z. No, that wasn't it. No, I'll do Control Z here. Yeah, that is. So define a customer.liaisons table. See, I don't know. I'll close that. I'm confusing myself a little bit now. What I'm looking for. Oh, that is customer schema. You see? So now I can just cut all of this. Right. Control X. Control V. Okay. And I can save this. And I've saved that. So you can see the constraint names, how I'm using it for doing stuff. You see how I've used a liaison. You can see how I'm using a default now for unique identifier, right? This one, maybe if I put in a note, but you see, I'm using what new ID for the unique identifier. This is what I'm using for the sequence. You see how I define the sequence? Okay. And that part you've seen. So I've saved that. And there's one thing left have left to do. I want to now use a sequential unique identifier. And I'm going to do that on the invoice table. And remember I said I want to put this invoice into their own table, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'll probably make 2 or 3 tables in that. So let's go over here first. I'll cut that, paste it here. And if you look at how I do stuff, you see I'm not always rewriting stuff from scratch. So I'll cut this part. Control C. Why is that? It just saves time. If you find it quicker to just type it, then go ahead, have at it. I just find this to be somewhat more convenient. So I'll do Shift Tab, and I want to do what do I want to call this schema? Invoice, right? And I'll change. Actually, what I'll do, I'm just going to do search, find, quick replace. You see when I highlight things, it will. So I'll say invoice and replace all. Boom. How nice is that? And now I'll do something I did over there. And I'll go to customer schema. And why do I do some of these things? It's just that see when I copy this stuff like this, it helps my comments be consistent. And now I'll just change this everywhere it says customer liaisons. Edit. Find quick replace. And I want to replace that with invoice dot, let's say invoice dot, well, you only have invoices for customers, right? So it will be invoices for customers. For you'll have bills for people you owe money, right? So you have bills from your creditors. So I'll probably make a bill table. I'll make a bill schema, and I'll probably have what, another bills table in there, and a creditors table. Does that make sense? It's just something I'm trying to do is very simply and easily. So invoices, and I'll go, okay, good. And so, and now I'm going to replace liaison, edit, find, quick replace with invoice. You see how it just set everything automatically? It just makes life so much easier. And when I also use the same convention of using surrogate ID for my primary keys, it just makes life so much easier. So, and now you see I've done this, I can go in and start changing things. So being it's an invoice ID, I don't need to say invoice ID, I just say, I'll just use ID. And I'm going to change this to, again, to unique identifier. And this time I'm going to use sequential unique identifiers, because that sequential unique I want to be able to track invoices sequentially. There's also a timestamp. So in this, I'm going to change it to customer ID. Right? This has to be not null. I'm going to make another table about called invoice items. Okay, and I'll do that in just a minute. And so I'm going to have, so I'll have that, I'll have the total price, I'll leave that. And then the total tax, I'm going to change this now to be AS, total price. Actually, let me do this. This will I'll probably have what? Yeah, I'll do this. I'll just have a price, which will be small money. I'll have a tax, total tax, which is going to be price times, let me say, to make it simple, I'm going to put another column in here of tax rate. I'll say tax rate, and I'll make this a float. Oops. Tax rate, and make this a float. Right? And I'll actually set the default tax rate to be, so I'll say this is not null. Right? We're always going to assume you have to pay a tax. Okay, and I'll make the price also not null. Okay, and now you see I'm going to total tax is price times so this is, you see the price is not, look over here, it looks like a price is a type, well, you can see it's for the invoice as a price, right? As a tax rate. So I can just call this tax, right? Price as what? Price times tax rate. Okay. And there's a, I need to put a comma here. And I'll put total over here is AS tax plus price. And you see, because these are computed columns, they don't have a data type. Okay. Now I have my timestamp, and I'm going to take some things out of here. So first thing is I'll take this out. And you see over here I'm using I'm using I'll change it to, I'm using the surrogate ID. Okay. And I'm going to also say, now I'm going to set the default tax and price, tax rate and price. So I'll go invoice ID default. But remember I said I'm going to do sequential ID, so I'll go new sequential ID for ID. You see that? And then I'm going to go, because these are going to be short and they're going to be values, I'll do constraint invoice tax rate DF default. I'll set the default as 0.00, right? For tax rate. And I'm going to go up here, I'll do constraint invoice price DF default for, default. What should we set the default price? Well, imagine something is free. We'll set it at 0.0. If the price is negative, it means that we owe that person money, right? So we'll make that. So we have that part done. Okay. Now I'm going to set, you see we don't have, and I'll take invoice ID has to be unique. We don't have phone numbers for E. We don't have phone numbers. The tax rate, the price, these don't have to be unique. The timestamp, we want that to be unique, don't we? Right? And we also want to set a default timestamp. See, it's nice. So I can use another function. So I'll do constraint invoice timestamp df default. And this is a function that will get current timestamp for timestamp, right? And I need to say, is it timestamp? There's a problem. Yeah, okay. So now you see that's fixed, okay? And I'm going to say, now there's an issue here. I can't guarantee that timestamp is always going to be unique. What if we have two transactions at the same time, right? It's very possible we might have two transactions or two invoices come through at the same time. So I don't want to say that they're unique. And you also see that's why I want to have, so I won't set that as unique right now. Okay? There's a chance that they might actually occur at the exact same time. So I'll just set the default value. You also see now that because that would happen, what I had before, where I had the primary key was on the ID and the timestamp, that could cause problems. Now I have this with the surrogate ID. Okay, and then the other issue is that we might have a large number of hopefully we'll keep having a very, very large number of invoices, right? So instead of making the invoice a surrogate ID, why don't we do something to make sure that they're always different? What I would like to do, I'll show you how I would do this. I'm going to make it just a little bit different. So I'm going to say surrogate ID is going to use a sequential unique identifier. The ID for the invoice is going to have that unique identifier plus the timestamp. So that's what I'll do. Now, but the issue with that is I don't think I can put make that a unique constraint. That's an issue. So maybe let's do, and I'll show you because I'm making that claim. So let me show you. So I'll put surrogate ID, unique identifier, not null, right? And I have ID. I'm going to change this to AS surrogate ID plus timestamp. Right? That works, doesn't it? You see it likes that. Now if I go, it seems to like that, doesn't it? And I'll put in here So you see that we have that over here. We don't have first name, last name. Take those away. And let's run this and see what happens. You see current, oh, so I have a typo in there. I was very sure it was current timestamp. And oh, default. Let me change this to get. Date. Okay. Get date does something very similar. Execute. You see they are incompatible with the add operation. You see I can't do that. That's a problem, right? I would have to do something else. So this doesn't work. You see? Let's say if I do surrogate ID plus what else? It doesn't work. Let's say I do surrogate ID plus no, that doesn't work. Let's say I do this. Oh, that's a number. Let me do plus. Let's just try to get this working. It's new ID. Okay. You see they're not compatible in the add operation. What was I doing? But surrogate ID is also. Oh, I know why. I'm adding two numbers. Execute. Operand type is invalid for an add operation. So that doesn't work. Okay, I'll just take as surrogate ID because I'm trying to show you that something about the. You see, computer column is not allowed to use another computer column. So what I would have to do is this is also showing me I can't do that. So what can I do is I can do this. I can do price plus what? Price times tax rate. Oops. And that part should work. But I'm expecting another error. Let's see what we get. Now you see column ID is invalid for creating a default constraint. You see, this is the error I really wanted to show you. That when we use computed columns, we can't impose constraints on them. You remember we covered that way back in the day, and I'll show you where in the notes it says that. If I go over here to creating tables in SQL, and there's a section on computed columns. See computed columns. We don't put a data type. I think I mentioned somewhere. Actually, let me just search computed column. Okay, you see you cannot calculate insert errors for them. Is there another thing? Okay, that's all. You can't put constraints on a computed column. That's why I wanted to show you, and you've seen that. So now I'll go back here. And let's see if we can make this work right. So I'll want to leave this, I'll put this as what? Unique identifier again. Actually, what I will do is I want the surrogate ID to be unique identifier still, but now I'm going to set the surrogate ID, the ID, I'm going to make this car I'm going to make this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something a little bit odd. I'm going to make this car, 20 right now. Maybe I should make it longer. So what I'm going to do, I'll show this to you later. I want to make the ID, I'm going to take probably customer ID, put it in there. I might put the timestamp in the ID, and then I'll have maybe a sequence of numbers or characters are generated. So that might help with. So let me just. So I'll leave it at 20 for now. 20 is a really long sequence, and I always keep trying to think. If you imagine someone having to read this, it's not. No one wants to read something that's 20 characters long. Okay, so maybe I will change that. Let's make it 12. Okay, 12. It's a bit better, and I will do it a little bit differently, and I'll say not null, right? And as a text rate, I have these two. Ideally, I would have a table of taxes, and maybe I'll actually do that. Okay. And what I would probably do is I'll have the state. I'll have a state, the tax rate for that. So why don't I just do that right now? Okay. Well, I'll make that table. And yes, I know I'm jumping around a little bit. But you see, now I have this idea. I will copy this, Control C. Later on, it will make sense about why I'm doing this. And actually, what I'll do is I'll do Control Z. Oops, yeah. Go to a new query, Control V, and I will change invoice dot invoices. Go edit. Find replace, quick replace invoices. I'll change this to tax rates. And go replace all. And even if I don't use it all right now, I'll say what? The ID. So this, since it says invoice, I know this is probably for things people are buying, right? So I'll just go, instead of here, I'll go, I don't need this column. I don't need to even say rate anymore. And now I'll change tax rate. Over here, I'll change it to just rate. And I can get rid of that. And I'll set state car 2 not null, right? I'll set the ID. Let's make this an int. Actually, I don't need an ID. I'll just use a surrogate ID. Okay? For that. Because the state has to be unique. The surrogate ID, I'll change this to int. There's not that many states. And this reminds me that there's an error I might have had, so I hit surrogate ID, right, default for surrogate ID. And I'm going to take that away, right, because I don't have a timestamp here. Tax rate, surrogate ID. Tax rate, I don't have that, do I? Oh, this is why you see I'm getting an error. I want float, not null. See, this is a really small table now. And I have that. And since this is just one column, actually, I want also constraint. State UQ. State UQ. Right? Unique. State. Yeah. And the invoice, the primary key is going to be surrogate ID. Int, not null. And I'm using that for the default. That's it. So even if I don't use this right now, I can use it later. So I'm going to execute this. Let's see. Column text rate in table. Oh. Look at where the error is. Oh yes, it should just rate, isn't it? Now I'll try running it again. There. And why do I want to do this? It's just easier and quicker for me to do it right now, you see, than to do it later. So I'll cut that. And this goes in the invoice. Paste. And I'm going to make one more table for the invoices schema. I'm going to make an invoice items. Okay. And so again, I'll just go in here, paste this, and I'm going to change tax rate. Search, edit, find and replace, quick replace tax rates with invoice. I'll just say items, because you know with the schema name you can read it as invoice items. Replace. Okay. And now I can just say, I'll do a search and replace for edit, find, quick replace, state with name. And I'll go varchar. I'll fix that later. Maybe I'll also say a description. varchar. Let's go with 50. The description can be blank. And I'll have a price. And this is going to be small money, right? There's still a surrogate ID. I'll leave that in there. I'll put an ID. And let's go with car 15. Okay. Not no. ID name, description, price type. And I'll put let me say type is a keyword in SQL. So I'll want to use category. And I'll make that car 20. Something I like to do is things which are going to be, there's some things that might be, well, categories aren't going to be unique. So I'll make that varchar. Things that are going to be unique, I'd like to make them car. So I'll say varchar 20. And so we have a price, surrogate ID, and yeah, this is good. This is perfectly fine. So now you see I'm going to replace invoice, edit, search, find, quick replace invoice with item. Replace all. Okay. Oops. I'll want to undo that. So what I could do is I'll search for item.items, edit, find, quick replace. I want to do invoice.items. There. That fixed it. And now I'm going to do, well, that still gives me some work over here. But you see I don't have a tax rate. And I'm going to change this to S. I'm going to have default. Now, you see the things that are not null? Some of them must have a default. I'm not going to have a default name. I'm not going to have I will probably have a default price. Right? So I'll go in here and I'll set item price. And I'll set that to 0. I'm thinking right now that I could have services. Services are by the hour. They calculate, but that's don't make it make it more complicated. Add. Oops, let me do Control Z. For price and invoice item name. That name has to be unique. The description You see, some descriptions can be blank, so I'm not going to say they should be unique. The price, the category, the surrogate. So that's all I need. And I've said that the surrogate ID will be a primary key. And I also want the ID to be unique, right? So I'll go in here and say constraint. And I'll change this to item name. You see that? Item ID. UQ. Unique ID. Yeah. So I know this is taking a little bit longer than I originally planned, but you're seeing kind of how I also try and do things, and you've also seen another ways by which we can combine and do a lot of stuff together. So I'll close that, and I will just run it from here. See, that seemed to work fine. So now I can cut this, and I'm going to put this over here. Control V. Okay. And I'm going to make another change, because remember, an item, an invoice, actually items go on an invoice, right? So I'll put in here invoice ID, and we see the type for that is car 12, right? So I'll just go Control C. And actually, to make this not confusing, if the ID of an invoice is 12, let me change this also to 12, right? It just makes life so much easier. Okay. And I think everything in here is the same. And just to test it, I'm going to drop all of this. But you've seen that if tables exist inside a schema, I can't drop them. So what I'll do is I'm going to comment this part out. And tab that over. And let's run this. Hopefully, if everything is working correctly, I'll have no errors. So you see cannot drop sequence. This is what I was thinking. I might have used it twice. Sequence invoice. You see over here, I need to change this to sequence dot what? Tax rate. Sequence or item, and I think in here I need to change this to sequence dot tax rate. And let me try running this again. Cannot drop sequence because it's already been referenced by tax rate surrogate ID. And if I go here, you see it. So I didn't drop this table. Let me first drop that table. Now, if I drop the table, does this part work? So you see there's already, where is this? So now I'm going to do a search for this. Copy, edit, Control F, Control V, and let's see where that is. So it's not in here. Let me see. No, that's sequence.company. This sequence.liaison. And if I go to in here, oh, I'll bet in here. This is where the problem is. Control C. That's where it is. Control V. And I'll bet over here. So now let me try. So you see tax rate surrogate ID, invoice surrogate ID, sequence.invoice, sequence.tax rate, sequence.item. So maybe let me try running this. Tax rate. Okay, you see over here, that's where it is. Control C, Control V, and I'll check over here. That looks right. Now let's see what happens. So I could do it by dropping this table. I know that you see, oops, that's not the table. I want to drop this table. Why did I know I need to drop that table? Because it was complaining. So now when I run this, hopefully, and I suspect that I might have tax rate surrogate ID, tax rate for surrogate ID, invoice.tax rate, not tax rate, this item, sequence.item. Let's try it again. Cannot drop table. Okay. So this is good. If object ID invoice.tax rates is not null. Oh, because I had that. So okay, I changed the ID to what? Car 12. That's why. Remember I was looking into that? So I'm going to take, you see it tells me which line number. It says line 32. You see what happens when this is all considered to be one line, and I can see it's over here, right? So I'll take that out, because remember I changed it to what? ID is car. I didn't want to use sequential because I'm using surrogate ID is unique identifier, right? So what I should do, and that's giving me an idea of what I need to fix. I'll cut this part, right? Control C. And I'll do Control V. And you see, for this now, I'm not using the sequence invoice. I'll just leave it anyway. I'll just leave it anyway because it doesn't hurt anything, right? And I'll take this part out. So don't have a default for the ID. I'm going to show you how to do that in another way. And now let's run this again, see what other errors we get. So you see there's already a voice called tax rate. And that's on line, 64. So it brought me to 64, right? Drop sequence tax rate. So I'm thinking it might be an error here, because it should drop the table. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run IntelliSense to refresh a local cache, see if that fixes anything. And yes, I know this is kind of irritating. There's already a tax rate default. In the database. Okay. Yes, I know. Okay. Remember I had this over here, right? So I had it before. But remember now I'm going to, so this is in what table? It's not in the invoice. This second one isn't in the invoice table, it's in the tax rates table, right? So I'm going to just call it tax rate. You see that? You see how this is helpful, right? And so I'll just run this again. Let's see. Invoice PK in the database. So where is it seeing it? It's over here. Okay, you see this is on the tax rate, so this should be what? Tax rate. PK. Alright, remember there. So I fixed all my errors. This also shows you why you have to be careful. Alright, and with that, we've seen how you can use sequential sequence objects, unique identifiers. And thank you for watching, and that's it for Oh, before I go, I'll show you the sections in the notes again so you can refer to them. So if I want to look at sequential unique identifiers, I'm not expecting you to know this. First, let's look at sequence objects because I see it right there. So this is a syntax. You have to make a sequence object by itself. I like to put them inside their own schema. And then to use it, and there's code examples here, right? You can see I made all of these sequence objects. And then later on over here, you see I'm altering it to use a default. So there's examples in the notes. You've seen it in the video. And let's look at the unique identifier. I think I took that over here. Data types you see as a unique identifier, right? We just say new ID generates when. And there's a sequential, and for sequential ID, what do we do? Default. You say new sequential ID. That's it. Okay, thanks folks, and I will talk with you later.